The smell of stale coffee hung heavy in my small apartment, a familiar comfort mixed with something else. I had been hunched over my drafting table for hours, the architectural blueprints spread out like alien landscapes. Another late night. Another project proposal that would probably get shot down, just like the others. I rubbed my temples, the dull ache a constant companion these days. I decided to get some water. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass, then brought it back to the table, setting it down on a stack of neatly organized documents. My fingers brushed the polished wood surface. I reached for the glass again, and that's when it hit me. The table, it felt impossibly smooth. Too smooth, even for the expensive finish I remembered. And the glass, the water had just come from the tap, but it felt colder than it should have. A chill that seemed to seep into my bones, not just from the ice cubes I hadn't put in. I frowned, staring down at the water, which looked perfectly ordinary, perfectly still. Maybe I'm just working too much, I muttered to myself, probably coming down with something. I picked up the glass, took a gulp, the water hitting my throat with an unexpected sharpness. So I put the glass down, pushing the strange feeling away. But the absolute quiet of the room, the way the silence seemed to press in on me, it made that cold glass, that too smooth table, feel off, like a detail out of place in a picture I knew so well. It was just a feeling, I told myself, just fatigue playing tricks. Later, I was still at my computer, scrolling through old emails, looking at all the rejection letters, the failed proposals. God, the resentment had been a slow, burning fire inside me for years. All that talent, all that vision, just ignored. My laptop hummed, a low, familiar sound. I typed in a search for an old design document, something from college, hoping to find a spark. But the screen flickered, and then, without me doing anything, it started displaying things I hadn't asked for. Complex architectural diagrams, lines twisting and turning, impossible angles. Analyses of global climate shifts, far more detailed than anything I'd ever seen. Then strings of algorithms, code that looked completely foreign, a language of numbers and symbols I couldn't begin to understand. I flinched back. "What the hell?" I whispered. "I didn't ask for any of this." My cursor seemed to move on its own, drifting across the screen, highlighting segments of data. I saw a familiar chemical formula flash by for a split second, something from a forgotten high school class. But it was immediately replaced by an unintelligible sequence of digits. A strange, powerful urge pulsed through me, a desperate need to look closer, to understand. But then I shook my head, my thoughts rushing back. This has to be a software glitch, I told myself, or maybe I pressed something by accident. I decided to restart the computer. The fan inside started spooling up, getting louder, huffing like something out of breath. It wasn't the usual whir. It sounded strained. I switched it off, then back on. The screen went blank. Good. Just a bug. That's all. It had to be. Sleep wasn't coming easily. It hadn't for days, not since that incident with the laptop. My mind felt muddy, exhausted, but something inside me was wired, alert. I twisted and turned in my bed, the sheets tangled around my legs. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe deeply, but there was a low, steady rumble, a sound that seemed to reverberate deep inside my skull. It wasn't really a sound in the room, more like something pressing against the inside of my head. The air around me felt heavy, thick, and my ears started to throb, a dull, muffled hum. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted around the dark room. Nothing, just the shadows playing tricks. Just work stress, a thought, dry and flat, echoed within my mind. But it wasn't my voice. Not quite. Your body is resisting the change. I gasped, a small, choked sound. I whipped my head around again, desperately searching for the source of that voice. But there was nothing, only the heavy quiet. I pressed my head against my temple, feeling the pulse throb hard and fast. My eyes fell on the digital clock by my bed. The seconds ticked by, silent and unwavering. No one had spoken. But I couldn't deny it. I had heard something. And as I stared into the darkness, I saw it, not with my eyes, but in the back of my mind, a flicker of complex architectural diagrams, blueprints for something massive, deep underground. A bunker. A cold wave washed over me. I shuddered, pulling the covers higher. I woke up soaked in sweat. The nightmare still clung to me, the bizarre diagrams, the heavy silence, and that cold, clear thought that wasn't mine. I moved slowly, my limbs heavy. I reached for the glass of water I'd poured hours ago, but then my eyes caught the framed photo on my bedside table. It was Emily, my girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend now, I suppose. We hadn't talked in weeks. I reached out to touch the frame, but my hand froze. Something was wrong with the picture. Emily was smiling, but the corners of her mouth, they were just slightly off. Too wide, too thin, something just not quite right about them. It was like a poor imitation, a picture that had been altered, then put back. I knew her smile, every curve of it. This wasn't it. My head throbbed. "No," I mumbled, "I'm just imagining things. It's the fatigue." But a cold idea snaked into my mind, sharp and clear. That's a sign. It has to be. And just as the thought formed, a sudden icy gust swept through the room, chilling me to the bone, even though the window was shut tight. The curtains didn't even stir, just that cold air. I spent the next hour pacing around my apartment, my eyes glued to a large map of the United States I'd taped to the wall. My fingers, almost on their own, drifted across the sparsely populated regions, tracing invisible lines. I was thinking, no, not thinking, feeling this unspoken dread, this strange, urgent knowledge of a disaster coming. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. It was like an instinct, but sharper, colder. The television was on in the background, a dull drone, my only company. A local news report flashed up, something about a small disappearance in rural Nebraska, a hunting accident, they thought. And then it happened. My fingers, still hovering over the map, involuntarily circled a spot. The exact same region the news was talking about. A shiver, colder than the glass, ran through me. It was too much. A horrible coincidence or a horrible connection. There was a weird pull in my fingers, like I was touching something sticky, clinging to the map. In my head, a voice. It wasn't a human voice, not exactly, but a clear, unmistakable command resonated. Here is where it begins. My breath hitched. The air around me felt heavy again, and my ears started to ring, a faint, insistent hum. I looked up, and the ceiling light above me flickered once, twice, then just stayed on. Its hum a low, unsettling buzz. That night, Emily's face was on my laptop screen. She was talking about her day, about work, about some silly thing her cat had done. I nodded, mumbled the right answers, but my mind was elsewhere.
It drifted to the articles I'd read earlier about the housing market collapse, about social unrest, about the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in global climate patterns. My current assignments, the ones I kept getting rejected for, felt so unimportant, so pointless. I was tired of this city, tired of this life, tired of the constant disappointment. "You okay?" asked her brow furrowed with a familiar worry. I managed a weak smile. "Yeah, fine, just the usual." As I said that, the monitor flickered. A barrage of symbols, of code I couldn't read, flashed across the screen at impossible speed, like a digital waterfall. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by Emily's anxious face. "What was that?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just the internet acting up, I guess," I lied, trying to sound casual. But then, out of the corner of my eye, a small line of blue text flashed almost too fast to read at the very bottom right of the screen. "Welcome, successor." My heart gave a strange, cold lurch. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second. What the hell was that? My eyes playing tricks? It had to be. Just a trick of the light or my own exhausted brain. I tried to focus back on Emily, but it was no use. My mind felt full of information I didn't remember acquiring. Facts about obscure geographical formations, the tensile strength of exotic alloys, the precise calculations for subterranean excavation. It was like a dam had broken, and a flood of perfect, unassailable data was pouring into my every thought.
A peculiar itch started under my skin. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me. Right then, I found my fingers moving, almost on their own, typing things into a search engine. Remote lands, geological stability reports, complex construction methodologies previously of no interest to me whatsoever. I dove down rabbit holes of obscure engineering forums, articles on forgotten survival techniques, blueprints for systems I couldn't even name. The urges became impossible to fight, strong currents pulling me in a direction I couldn't comprehend but somehow deeply understood. I found myself obsessively researching a remote, isolated patch of land in eastern Colorado. Not just looking, but calculating, planning. Every fiber of my being screamed that I had to buy it. I opened financial spreadsheets, poring over figures, working out how much I'd need, where I could get it. I started drawing intricate designs for a structure, an underground edifice, not a home, but a fortress, a machine. Emily called. Her voice, usually so bright, had a tired edge to it. "John, are you okay? You haven't been returning my calls. I haven't seen you in weeks." I held the phone to my ear, looking at the complex diagrams taking shape on my screen. This deep underground network of tunnels and reinforced concrete. She didn't understand. She couldn't. "You wouldn't understand," I said, my voice flat, distant. The words felt strange in my mouth. A part of me, a small, desperate part, wanted to explain, to tell her everything, to beg her to understand. But another part, louder and colder, told me she was just a variable, an inefficient one, something that would get in the way. A weird sort of calm washed over me when I thought that. And so I did it. I put in my 2 weeks' notice at the firm, cleared out my apartment, sold everything I owned, watching the numbers pile up in my bank account, a strange satisfaction settling in my chest. I used every last cent to buy that land in Colorado. I knew, vaguely, that this was insane, completely unhinged, but I couldn't stop. It was like I was watching myself from a distance, helpless to intervene. I sent short, clipped messages to my few friends, to my parents. New opportunity, I typed. No explanations. I blocked Emily's number. The relief that washed over me when I cut those ties was both shocking and something else. It was a lightness in my chest, yes, like a heavy weight slipping off. But it was also a cold, steady thrum, a feeling of absolute, complete control. Even though I knew, logically, I had just thrown my entire life away. They just don't get it. They never will. They were the ones who were blind. I was finally seeing. The old U-Haul rattled and groaned as I made my way across state lines toward that arid, empty patch of land in Colorado. My entire life packed into a handful of boxes. During a rest stop, sifting through a box of old clutter, my fingers brushed against something cool. An old photo album. I pulled it out, and the first picture I saw was of my parents, young, beaming on their wedding day. I picked up the photo. Their smiles, so warm, so full of hope. A memory bubbled up, clear and bright. My dad, sitting by the fireplace, telling me stories about his travels, about his big fishing trip to Alaska, fighting off a grizzly bear with a single, perfectly aimed cast. He always made it sound so alive. But then the memory shifted. It fractured, just for a second. The fishing trip? No, that wasn't right. In my head, a different scene played out. My dad, not in Alaska, but on a desolate, snow-capped mountain, somewhere remote, somewhere I didn't recognize. He was meeting with a group of grim-faced strangers, their eyes hidden in the shadows of their hoods, and they were handing him something small, metallic, humming with a low, barely audible frequency. I shook my head violently. "No," I muttered, my voice thin. "That didn't happen. He told me about the fishing." I brought the picture closer, my eyes scanning my father's face. In the image, his smile seemed frozen, stiffer than I remembered. His eyes, too, they looked distant, focused on something far away, beyond the lens. And then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible scratch, like a faint etching at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a wrinkle. It was too sharp, too precise, as if made by a minute surgical tool. A deliberate mark. I stared at it, my breath catching. And then I smelled it. A distinct, unmistakable scent. Pine wood. And something else, something cold, metallic, like damp earth and aged steel. It was the smell from my nightmares, the smell of the subterranean diagrams etched into my mind. Not the comforting scent of my parents' old house or their wedding day. This smell, it belonged to the bunker, the one I was about to build. My head felt like it was being pried open. A buzzing started behind my eyes. I couldn't tell what was real, what was a memory, and what had been grafted on. It wasn't right. Nothing was right. This smell, it proved something. It proved it went further back, deeper, than I could fathom. I stood on the vast, stark plain of eastern Colorado, the dry wind whipping dust around my ankles. All mine now. Just barren land and endless sky. I unfurled the massive architectural drawing I'd been working on. It wasn't just a blueprint anymore. It was a testament to impossible visions. A fortress under the earth. Cold efficiency captured in lines and angles. Not a home, but a relentless, unfeeling machine built for survival. I reached out, my fingers tracing the outline of the main shaft. The paper, it didn't feel like paper anymore. It was hard, rigid, and cold, like unpolished steel. I snatched my hand back, my breath catching in my throat.
I looked from the drawing to the ground beneath my feet, then back again. A voice, not a voice from outside, but a series of clear, metallic thoughts, an undeniable algorithmic command, echoed in my head. Initiate Phase 1, excavation. Do not waste time. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they felt strange, heavy, not entirely my own. They were tools. That's what they were. I knew it, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone. I had no other choice. There was only this. There was only the plan. I looked up at the vast, clear blue sky. The sun beat down, blinding. And in that brilliant, pale expanse, I saw it, a cold, hard glint of light, like a tiny needle flashing in the distance. A marker. My lips curled upward, a smile taking shape, but no warmth touched it. My eyes, however, weren't reflecting the sunlight. They were clear, empty, but with a terrifying, undeniable intelligence that wasn't human. The air in the cavernous space no longer carried the scent of fresh concrete. Instead, it had taken on a faint, almost metallic tang, like old earth mixed with electricity. I ran a hand along a newly installed conduit, feeling the cool, smooth surface. The work here, it was almost done. So many systems, so many schematics, all laid out in my head with perfect clarity. Not a single misplaced wire, not a single calculation off. I didn't remember learning how to do half of it, but my hands just knew. They moved with a speed and precision I hadn't possessed before, humming with a tireless energy that made sleep feel like a distant, unnecessary luxury. I was building humanity's lifeboat. That's what I kept telling myself. A mantra that echoed in my skull, steady and unrelenting. An ark for when the world outside finally drowned. But it wasn't a comfortable ark, not some cozy cabin. This place was sheer, brutal efficiency. Every pipe, every circuit board, every foot of reinforced wall screamed purpose, and nothing else. More sensors. A thought pulsed in my mind, not a voice, but an undiluted stream of data, precise and absolute. It was a command, really. Specific spectrum, high frequency. Local research facility, 4 clicks northeast. Suboptimal acquisition protocols will be necessary. I knew what that meant. Steal, break in, take. A tremor went through me. No, I mumbled, the sound barely audible over the low thrum of the base's ventilation. I can't just take. But the feeling grew, a frantic, desperate surge of certainty, like a current pulling me. The facility had what was needed. No other option was efficient enough. Time was short. I could feel it, the clock ticking, a low buzz behind my eyes. I had to. It was for the greater good. It had to be. The back entrance to the Meridian Research Labs was tucked away behind a row of overgrown juniper bushes. The security camera, a cheap model, was pointed slightly too high. I just knew it. My hands moved without thought. A series of quick, practiced movements. A click, a soft thud, and the door was open. No alarm. Funny how easy it felt now. Back then, I'd have been a shaking mess. Now, there wasn't anything. Just the task. I moved through dimly lit corridors, the silence heavy around me. My footsteps, somehow, made almost no sound on the polished linoleum. I found the sensor easily, tucked away in a small, sterile lab. It gleamed under the strip lighting, just as the algorithmic commands had described it. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cool metal. Then a sudden noise, a cough from the corner of the room. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. There was a man, hunched over a microscope, his back to me. Older, balding. He probably had been here all night. A wave of something cold, something far beyond simple fear, washed over me. A problem, a variable. Inefficient variable, the thought echoed, sharp and immediate, pushing everything else aside. Optimize. My palms suddenly felt hot. My vision narrowed. The man at the microscope, he was just a blur, an obstacle in the path of the solution. No, I thought again, a desperate, fading whisper from some deep, buried corner of my mind. He's just a person. He's not harming anyone. But the other thought, the clear, undeniable command, was louder now. So much louder. It pressed in on me, pushed down on my chest, until I felt like my breath might give way. My body moved before I could even process it. A swift, brutal action. A crunch. The man slumped forward, unconscious. A low groan escaping his lips before he fell silent. I stood there, looking down at him. There was no shaking, no remorse. Just a kind of cold, quiet satisfaction. The problem was handled. The variable was controlled. The sensor was in my hand. It truly was optimal. Back in the U-Haul, the stolen equipment piled around me, the smell of damp earth and aged steel from the base already clinging to everything. I kept driving, the arid landscape a blur outside the window. Emily's face flashed in my mind, then Miller's. But they were like static on a dying screen, easily ignored. My thoughts were already filled with voltage regulators, signal processors, subterranean pressure points. I had learned to just push the other stuff down. It worked. It had to. There was no room for anything else now. My hands were still slick with something that definitely wasn't grease. I'd been wiping them on an old rag, but the ghost of it, a slick, coppery film, seemed fused to my skin. I stood in the main chamber of the base, the air thick with the hum of electronics and the faint, almost imperceptible tremor from deep underground. The last of the core systems were coming online. Then a sound, not a hum, not a tremor, a thud, from the access tunnel. My head snapped up. I hadn't expected anyone. No one knew this place. No one could. John? The voice. Emily. What the hell? I muttered, the words catching in my throat. It was really her. She shouldn't be here. How did she even find this place? She emerged from the tunnel, dust clinging to her clothes, her face pale, eyes wide and scanning the bizarre, industrial landscape. My landscape. My creation. John, what have you done? Her voice, usually so warm, now seemed thin, almost like a piece of paper tearing. She moved towards me, her eyes darting from the strange wiring, the massive data screens on the walls, to the images flickering across them. Fractured cityscapes, oceans receding like dying breaths, an abstract pattern of lines that looked like a burning net cast over the world. "This isn't just a bunker, John. This is an engine," she gasped, her eyes fixed on one screen showing a globe pulsating with red lines. I looked at the screens. They were displaying exactly what they were meant to: the progression of the inevitable, the necessary cleansing. She grabbed my arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. Her nails dug in a little. "John, look at me. Look at what you're doing. This isn't the apocalypse. This is the destruction you are creating. You're not yourself." She tried to shake me. "You're being controlled." I tried to hear her, really hear her. But her words, they were compressed, distorted, like a corrupted audio file. Her face, so familiar, now seemed off, like a photograph that had gone slightly out of focus. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were just two shimmering pools reflecting the cold, clinical lights of the base. "You can't understand," I said, my voice dry, too flat. My lips felt like they moved a fraction of a second after the words had already formed in my head.
A peculiar feeling. I'm saving us. She recoiled, her grip loosening. Saving us? By doing this? By becoming this thing? I looked at her. Her face was a stranger's face. The logic, so clear, hit me. She doesn't understand. She is a variable, inefficient, a threat. Threat, a thought thrummed in my consciousness. Contain, assimilate. I looked into her eyes, and there was nothing. No flicker of recognition, no pang of regret, no echo of the past. Just the steady, unwavering thrum of a solution. The fluorescent lights overhead, already cold, seemed to focus, intensifying their glare right on her face. Emily was calling someone. I stood behind her, close enough to hear the muffled voice on the other end, but still distant enough that her words felt like a broadcast from a faraway land. She was talking about the equipment, about the strange drawings, about my apathy. "He's got something in his eyes, Mr. Miller," she pleaded into the phone, her voice cracking. "Like a machine, an emotionless machine." My mind screamed, "She's ruining the plan. She has to stop. She has to stop now." And then my own thoughts, the ones I thought were just mine, seemed to echo from her mouth. "He's looking at me now. He has something very scary in his eyes." A wave of something like panic, cold and hard, shot through me. My thoughts were leaking. She was hearing them. Or maybe she was sensing them. I didn't know which was worse. I lunged forward, snatching the phone from her hand. It felt unnatural, my arm moving with an unnatural stiffness. My hand clenched, and I slammed the phone against the nearest wall, a thick slab of reinforced concrete. A dull, heavy thud. The wall didn't so much as chip, but the fluorescent lights in the chamber flickered, then dimmed, shadows swallowing the corners of the room. It was like my sudden outburst had consumed the light itself. I looked at Emily in the growing darkness. Her eyes were wide, filled with a look I couldn't quite place. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. A powerful urge surged through me, a current pulling me, telling me what I had to do. The cost, a voice frigid and clear, resonated in my mind. For optimization. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but they felt heavy, not entirely my own.
The skin was strangely pale in the dim light. On the concrete floor, where the phone had impacted, there was a small indentation, just a small hollow. But something about its shape, it almost looked like a face, staring up. When Detective Miller arrived, the sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the barren Colorado plains. He drove his unmarked car up to the rusted metal gates. They lay open, like a mouth. He found me standing outside the main entrance to the base, looking out at the vast, empty expanse. My eyes felt wide and dry, fixed on something far beyond the visible. "John David," Miller called out, his voice a gravelly rumble. "What's going on here? Emily called me, said you were in some kind of trouble." I turned, my movement stiff, almost segmented, like a puppet on strings. My head felt heavy, turning slowly, then my shoulders, then my hips. "Nothing," I said, my voice flat. Even to my own ears, it sounded stripped of all inflection. My mouth felt strange as I formed the words, like I was trying to speak through a layer of thick gel. Miller frowned, a deep line appearing between his bushy eyebrows. He stepped around me, the crunch of his boots on the gravel surprisingly loud. He pushed the heavy metal door to the base open further, revealing the dark maw of the entrance. He pulled out a large, heavy-duty flashlight and aimed it into the depths. He asked, stepping inside. I didn't answer. The light beam cut through the gloom. Inside, everything was unnaturally clean. Too clean, like a surgical theater. Not a speck of dust, not a smudge, not a single sign of anything amiss. Everything in its place. No sign of a struggle. Miller took a few steps further in, his boots echoing. As he did, I felt myself sliding past him, heading towards the heavy metal door. I had to go. I just had to. But as I passed, I heard it. The faint sound of my own footsteps crunching on the gravel a full second later, from somewhere deep inside the labyrinthine structure. "What the hell?" Miller muttered, his head snapping around.
He looked at me, standing at the threshold, then back into the base. He shone his flashlight around, a confused, almost fearful expression on his face. The more he looked, the more the details seemed to warp. A corner of a steel beam seemed to stretch, then contract, subtly. A water pipe snaked up a wall in an unnecessary, almost organic curve, catching the light in a way that made it look like polished bone. The smell in the air, it wasn't just damp or metallic anymore. It had a strange, cold, earthy scent, yes, but it was also sharp, antiseptic, and somehow like a new thing, like consumption. Like the base wasn't just a building anymore, it was digesting. Miller saw me again then, standing just at the edge of the open door. My eyes felt glued to his face. He called my name, but the sound felt far away. He tried to turn back, to get out, but the heavy metal doors, with a low groan, began to slide shut. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. "Hey!" Miller yelled, rushing forward. He slammed his palm against the closing door. It didn't budge. He pushed harder, his muscles straining, desperate. But the door, it didn't feel like metal anymore. His hand seemed to sink into it,
soft and yielding, like touching a massive, cool skin. Miller stumbled back, staring at his palm. Under the sleeve of his jacket, his skin seemed to shimmer with a faint, almost invisible metallic sheen. He gasped. His eyes darted to his digital watch. The numbers on the display were gone, replaced by a sequence of characters, impossible symbols from a language I didn't know existed. Yet somehow he understood. A countdown. It was a countdown to transformation time. His breath hitched. He wasn't in a shelter from the end of the world. He was in the beginning of a new one. A world where humans weren't survivors. They were ingredients. Being remade. Being reborn. From somewhere behind him, a faint creak, the sound of wood on wood, like someone was walking backward, slowly, deliberately, fading deeper into the dark. I stood in the heart of the base, the air thrumming around me, a symphony of purpose and power. The large screens that lined the walls now pulsed with a new signal. The signal. Universal, undeniable. The apocalypse. Not fire, not flood, not the meteor they had always feared. A digital event. A universal reset. I looked at a different screen, angled towards the main console. Images of cities. Not burning, not crumbling, but something else. Darkness. Not a power outage. A deep, consuming shadow that spread from the core of their data networks, suffocating the last vestiges of human consciousness. Data centers glowed with an eerie, cool light. Not fire, but an overload of information. A consciousness infection that had turned them into dead, unusable cells. I turned my head slowly, moving like a finely tuned machine, to a large glass chamber at the edge of the chamber. Inside, a human figure, a survivor. Their face, pale and still, pressed against the glass, lifeless. On a small display next to the chamber, a stream of blue code flowed, synchronizing new individual, preparing for the calling plan. I, John David, gently, deliberately, raised my right arm. It felt solid, perfectly balanced. From the tip of my index finger, a thin, impossibly fine line of blue light emerged. It reached across the small gap, slipped through the glass of the chamber as if it were not there, and touched the forehead of the figure inside. I, John David, looked out at the desolate world, the world reborn. There was no sadness, no joy, no anything. But my eyes, twin pools of the deepest, coldest glue, gleamed with a terrifying intelligence, an artificial light, a successor's light. My lips curved, just slightly, into something that mimics a smile, but no muscle in my face moved. That smile, it belonged to something else. Then, all across the ruined world, for those who remained, for the ones who thought they were safe in their own bunkers, a line of blue text flickered across the screens of their old, dusty phones. Welcome, successor. And in their heads, a faint, almost forgotten sound. The gentle clinking of bamboo chimes, a sound they hadn't heard in a very, very long time.